Good afternoon to those who are currently already logged into our webinar. I'm just waiting a few minutes to allow others to do the same. Or not a few minutes, but a few seconds. Welcome to our last icebreaker speaker series of the season. Now that the temperatures are rising, hopefully, our staff will be moving out into the field and we will be concluding this year's speaker series. But we've been so appreciative of all of you who have joined us. It's been a stellar year with great speakers and wonderful attendance. Today's presentation is pretty exciting because we have two of our own staff members who will present a discussion on septic solutions and some of the research that we've been doing recently. My name is Katie Wolf, and I'm the Executive Director of the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. Our mission, as you can see there, is science-based and focused on protecting water quality. That's the short description. We serve primarily 4 counties, although the watersheds that we serve, there are 5, dip into, I think, about 8 counties altogether. And as you can see, there's an abundant supply of fresh waters within those watersheds. So we have an extensive footprint in northern Michigan. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that during the webinar, you will be muted and the speaker will be the only one that will be live. We will ask that you submit questions and the bar below for the Q&A. The chat box will just be used for us to post information for participants. It may be that we post links to information that is discussed. And then if you put your questions in the Q&A box, we will answer those during the last 15 minutes. If by chance we have more questions than we can answer, we will make sure that our experts get back to you individually. I want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and we will place that online both with our website at watershedcouncil.org, as well as our YouTube page. And so either sources of those, you can access it or forward it to others if you want to share. The other option is we will put a post up on Facebook as well. You do not have to be a member of Facebook to access it. You just need to go to the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council page on Facebook. And so I'd like to introduce our 2 speakers today, Lauren Dye and Jennifer McKay. If you've interacted regularly with Tip of the Mitt, you may already be familiar with them. Lauren Dye is the Watershed Programs Director at Tip of the Mitt, and Jennifer is the State and Federal Policy Director with Tip of the Mitt. They both have extensive backgrounds in the environmental sciences, and you can trust that they will give you great information today. I would like to touch base a little bit on the topic and just let you know, with septic solutions, this is an area that is of great concern. As many of you know, Michigan is one of the few states that does not have I think the only state that does not have a statewide septic code. And yet we have lots of lakes with septic systems around there. So it is a concern, and particularly as development continues to grow around our inland lakes. And so what we did last year was started a research project. And so some of the findings that Lauren is going to discuss with you, it is all part of a pilot that we had underway in Lake Charlevoix. And we will continue working in this direction. So you're really getting information at that front end. But know that for us to really validate and have findings that then we can develop future programming from, we will have to continue that pilot for a few more years. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lauren, and I know she's going to do a great job.
All right, thank you the introduction, Katie. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, how does that look for everyone?
Lauren, if you could speak up just a little bit.
Sorry about that. Having sound difficulties. Okay, so myself and Jennifer McKay are going to talk about a model for evaluating septic pollution, and we're co-presenting because it's kind of twofold. At the Watershed Council, we do a lot of work with monitoring, research, and policy-related things, and they all tie together. So we kind of wanted to give you as much of an overview on all of the work that we're doing as possible. So we're going to touch on the results of the septic survey that Katie mentioned, as well as those policy initiatives. So many of you may be aware that improperly maintained septic systems can pose a problem to inland lakes. There are over 1.3 million on-site septic systems in Michigan, and it has been estimated that more than 1/3 of them are not functioning properly, and that 10% of them have already failed. Poorly functioning septic systems may introduce excess nutrients and bacteria to surface waters that can be harmful to human health and to ecosystems by contributing to eutrophication. Many septic issues are not identified until there's complete septic failure or there's nuisance complaints. So with that, I'm going to jump into the Lake Charlevoix septic study. And as Katie mentioned, this is a pilot project that we started last year. We partnered with the Lake Charlevoix Association, and this project was funded by the Charlevoix County Community Foundation. And the goal of the project was to determine if and to what extent the lake was being impacted by septic systems. This project was aimed at increasing general knowledge as well as education surrounding septic systems to homeowners to help determine what the nutrient inputs are to the lake and how we can improve the current methods for evaluating pollution coming from septic systems and to help identify those problems before they become a complete failure. I also want to add that this project was conducted by our former Water Resources Manager, Caroline Thiessen. So when we get to the end for questions, I will do my best to answer them, but not sure if I'll be able to answer them all. So.
Lauren, we're getting a lot of comments that are really hard to hear. So maybe if you could slow down just a bit and speak up a bit, that would be helpful.
Okay, I'm going to hold my microphone closer to my mouth, and hopefully that helps a little bit too. Okay. So for this project, we worked with our partners and reviewed other studies to help determine how we can monitor the surface waters to look at nutrient input. As many of you probably understand, it's very difficult to do this kind of sampling in surface waters because there are a lot of variables that we have to look at or to kind of work around, and that being waves, wind, and also a lot of boating traffic because we have our lakes are very busy in the summertime.
Lauren,
yep.
If you could excuse me for a minute, we're getting quite a few notes about the sound quality. So I just wanted to let people know we recognize that there is an issue with Lauren's microphone, and we are working behind the scenes to get that corrected as quickly as possible. And so maybe in the meantime, if you could just slow down a little bit and talk a little bit louder. And there will be a little bit of background activity with Lauren trying to get her better situated. Thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, real quick, I'm going to try to switch out cameras to see if that helps.
Thank you for your patience.
All right, are you able to hear me now?
Excellent, much better.
Okay, good, I'm glad you got that sorted. Okay, thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, so as I was mentioning, we know that there are a lot of variables with sampling in surface waters. So it was determined that we need to make sure that we have an increased number of sample points along the lakeshore, as well as have an increased number or increase the frequency of monitoring. And then also be cognizant of the weather. So we had to make sure we kind of narrowed our scope or the window in which we were able to work because we had to work around a lot of the weather. It was also determined that qPCR would be a really great asset to this project because it is a relatively new method that can identify the source of bacteria in water, and that bacteria will determine whether or not that came from human or animals. But because of the expense of this project and the lack of capacity for labs in our areas, we decided to conduct other monitoring to kind of narrow in on where the qPCR would be the most helpful. Previous studies have also used qPCR to identify hotspots. However, the work that those studies were doing, they were collecting their surface water, or they're collecting their surface water samples about 50 feet from shore. And when you're that far out, it's hard to say with enough confidence that that pollution or what those nutrients are telling us is coming directly from that property. So it was important to us to try to collect our samples as close to shore as possible. Okay. So here's the basic project plan that we had. We needed to identify areas to sample. We're going to send a letter and pre-survey to homeowners, collect surface water samples, collect groundwater samples, and also send a follow-up survey. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are aware that Lake Charlevoix is a very large lake and it has about 60 miles of shoreline. So it wasn't realistic for us to try to get every property along the shoreline, because that's about 1,700 properties. So by working with our partners at the health department and with Lake Charlevoix Association, we were kind of able to narrow in on what areas we should be focused on. So the Watershed Council used the shoreline survey that we conducted on Lake Charlevoix from 2018, because one of the data points that we collect is if there's any presence of Cladophora, which is a good bioindicator of nutrient pollution. So that kind of helped us identify those areas where we saw that Cladophora growth. And then the health department also helped us identify areas that were of concern based on, their knowledge and, kind of their, the data that they have. And then Lake Charlevoix Association helped us identify any areas that may have had older communities or cottages around the lake to kind of focus to. So we were able to take that, approximately 1,700 properties and narrow it down to about 900. Okay, so for the first step of this project, once we had identified the areas that we were going to be sampling, we sent out a property owner survey. We set a goal to get a 10% response rate from those homeowners, and we got 15%. So we were happy to see that. We sent that survey out both through snail mail and email from the email list that Lake Charlevoix Association provided us for their membership. The types of questions that we were asking these property owners was what the septic system features that they had at their home, as well as what the size of their home is, the number of users, what types of appliances they have that might use water, as well as the age of the system and whether or not they were having any issues with their septic system, and also what their lakefront conditions are. This is all information that is going to be helpful in kind of helping us to kind of assess that data and also work with homeowners in terms of education. This here is a map of the responses that we got from around the lake. Okay, so I'm going to share a few of the results or a few of the questions that we got feedback on, just to kind of give you an idea. So again, this is 77 responses that we received. So of that, you can see that largely all these responses are all seasonal homes, which is pretty surprising just how many there were. But of course, we all know that many of the homes around our lakes are seasonal. So we kind of wanted to poll those that are on the call today to see, where our participants kind of fall. If you live on a lake, is your residence occupied year-round or seasonally? Okay, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. So a lot of people on the call today are year round. That's nice to see. Okay, so how old is your septic system? Of the responses we got, you can see a lot of them are kind of on the older end. Their systems are getting to be on the older end. It said that septic systems typically have a lifespan of about 30 years. So we note that a lot of them are starting to get a little bit older. And there's also quite a few that didn't know how old their septic system is. So if we make assumptions based on that, it's likely that it may be an older system. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. And yep, it looks like we're about the same for those that are on the call today as well. Okay, and then how often is your septic tank pumped? Many of the respondents, fell within 3 to 5 years, which is what's recommended. And of course, that recommendation is based on a few different factors. Again, looking at the number of people that had an unknown, weren't sure how often their septic tank is pumped. Again, it may likely be that it's not pumped frequently enough. Okay, move on to our next slide. Okay, good. A lot of you pump 3 to 5 years. Okay, now we're going to get into kind of our monitoring protocol for this project. So for the surface water sampling, we went out to all these properties that were in our area of concern and we're taking water samples. And what kind of triggered that for us is we would take our multi-parameter sonde out there, which measures temperature and pH, dissolved oxygen and conductivity. What we were primarily looking at was the conductivity, and anything that was over the ambient conductivity levels for Lake Charlevoix. That's typically around 300 or 325 is what we found in our regular monitoring is where the conductivity falls. And the reason we're looking at conductivity specifically is because it's a good indicator of urbanization and any sort of pollutant. So it's kind of a good indicator of kind of human presence. So if our sonde gave us any readings back that were above that 300, 325, it would trigger us to take a water sample. So we were collecting a water sample that we were sending to Central Michigan University to analyze the nutrients for us, and then also collecting a sample to determine what the E. coli levels were in that. And that was analyzed at the health department in Gaylord. The results of that found that at 73% of the properties, there were varying levels of E. coli present. Here is a map of the conductivity readings on the lake. So you can see that there are a few that flagged as pretty high for the surface water conductivity readings. Okay, so for groundwater sampling, we were only able to visit those properties that we got permission from to actually access. So of the 77 responses that we got, 67 people granted us, permission to access their property. However, due to time constraints, we were only able to make it to about 15 of those properties. So for groundwater sampling, we took a groundwater piece of monitoring equipment. That's the one that you see there with the hose. And then we also took a soil meter that would help tell us what the conductivity was. And so by going out onto the property and determining where those, high conductivity level spikes were, that would prompt us to that's where we would be taking our water sample. Again, we are looking at conductivity. Our sample was analyzed for nutrients and E. coli. So of the 15 properties that we took samples at, 61% of those had varying levels of E. coli as well. This here is a map of the conductivity readings from our groundwater samples. When looking at groundwater, any conductivity that has a reading of about 400 microsiemens per centimeter squared is kind of a trigger. concern. And so that can not only tell us, like, that's not necessarily indicative of specifically septic leachate, but could also be fertilizer as well. Okay, so the lessons learned from this project is that it was extremely labor intensive. The amount of time that it took us to go out, by kayaking around shorelines to collect these water samples, and then also having to contact landowners to find a time where we could access their property was a large amount of time. We also had to rent the equipment for the monitoring. So that soil meter that as I mentioned, was something that we had to rent because it's not something that we have in-house. As part of this project, we weren't able to conduct any of the qPCR because of time constraints, and then also it was going to be part of the project later on because of those limiting costs and lab capacity and abilities in our region. E. coli was also limiting due to hold time. It has a hold time of only 3 hours, which means that we have to, once we collect that sample, we have to get it to the lab within 3 hours. And the closest lab to us was in Gaylord at the health department. So that really limited, our sampling as well. We do think that the property owner survey was successful. As I mentioned, we set a goal for 10% and got 15. So, not only did we get data from that, but we were also able to provide information to the homeowners and about septic systems as well. And then the residents appreciated having us being able to come out there and, help them determine if they were having any issues. Because as, I mentioned in the beginning, septic failures may not be noticed until, it's, past the point of repair, or unless you might, you see kind of some of those indicators of septic failure. So the next steps for this project are to analyze the data. We would have liked to have been able to provide you with some sort of conclusions or results for this icebreaker today. However, we did get we only very recently got the last of our nutrient data in, so we're unable to provide that for you today. We also plan on conducting a follow-up survey with those homeowners that we did, where we did collect those groundwater samples so that they know kind of what we found from that. And then we also want to be able to improve the monitoring protocol. There's been several lake associations that have reached out to us that are interested in this project. And so we want to make sure that we're able to kind of hone in on what those methods are, as well as really be able to assess the amount of time that these projects will take before we really carry those out. I think the most important thing we found is that this is going to need to be phased projects. So those lake associations that have expressed interest, we are going to be recommending that we get started with that survey this year, and then follow up with some of the monitoring next year once we have our areas really kind of nailed down. Because we will be working on analyzing those results this summer at our Lake Association Summit that we're going to have in September. We will be having a presentation on this, so if anyone's interested in really seeing what we were able to find out from our methods in monitoring, you can tune into that, or get a hold of one of us if you are unable to attend that for whatever reason. So there's lots to do. As we mentioned, it was just a pilot project, so there's a lot we've learned from this, and we do think that it is a very promising start to this project, and do feel that in the future and going forward we will be able to have something that we can apply. And methods that we can apply to all of our surface waters within our region. Okay, next I'm going to hand it on over to Jennifer McKay.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm going to talk about all of the other aspects that the Watershed Council does to provide local protections for septic systems. So you can go to the next slide. So as was mentioned, in Michigan, 35% of our residents rely on septic systems, and that means there are between 1.3 and 1.4 million on-site septic systems throughout our state. Each system generates about 300 to 400 gallons of sewage daily. So basically in Michigan must treat and dispose of more than 455 million gallons of wastewater each day. As was mentioned, Michigan is the only state without uniform standards for how on-site septic systems are designed, built, installed, and maintained. Public health officials in Michigan believe that reported septic system failures represent only a fraction of the total number of failures statewide, and many go undetected or unreported for many years. Michigan State University did a study that suggests at least a third of septic systems in our state are not working properly. And as Lauren said, a failing or improperly maintained system can introduce nutrients, bacteria, viruses, pharmaceuticals, and other pollutants into our lakes, streams, wetlands, and groundwater. Next slide. So in an effort to ensure septic systems are properly maintained, the Watershed Council works on a variety of levels. We conduct education and outreach to homeowners that have septic systems. We advocate for septic policies on the local and statewide level. And as you just heard from Lauren, we obviously are working on the monitoring aspect. Next slide. So one of the reasons why education and outreach is so important for us, particularly in Northern Michigan, is because our population is highly seasonal. In general, we have many second homeowners, and our population overall rises by about 75% in the summer. Some of those second homeowners will come up for just a few weekends, others for a few months. But in general, they want to come up and they want to relax, they want to play on the water, and none of them are really thinking about septic maintenance. The seasonal changes within our service area are quite astounding. Emmett County experiences 105% seasonal change. Antrim County, 92%. Charlevoix County is a 72% change in population in the summer. Networks Northwest conducted a seasonal population study for all of Northwest Lower Michigan, but they found that in Charlevoix County alone, there's an increase of roughly 295,000 people to the region in summer. It's driven primarily by overnight visitors. And so for the month of July, overnight visitors account for 40% of the region's population. And while the majority of them stay in traditional accommodations, such as hotels, motels, and our campgrounds, the rest of them stay in short-term rentals. And I don't know if any of you have ever looked at or stayed in a short-term rental. A lot of the short-term rentals are over capacity of what the septic systems can handle. These days, we now have, a home that was meant for 3 people that is listed that for 10 people to stay. And so on a monthly basis, the region averages roughly 4,300 short-term rental listings. And that equates to 213,000, room nights available for short-term listings. And this just tells you how our septic systems are over capacity. So this is one of the reasons why education and outreach is so important. Next slide. So we conduct education and outreach through a lot of the typical outlets that you would think. We, have publications, we do presentations such as what we're doing today. We provide information via newsletter articles in the media. We have a web page. And again, we're working on monitoring for potential problems with septic systems. So last year we developed a new publication, Proper Septic System Maintenance. It's a guide for homeowners that covers all of the basic information anyone needs. How does a septic system work? How to maintain a septic system, when and why to pump the tank, signs of a failing system, then what do you do if your system is failing, benefits of proper maintenance. So we have that available if anyone's interested. All you have to do is contact our office. Next slide. In addition to just the general education and outreach, we also do policy and advocacy, where we work to encourage those local governments to adopt septic ordinances. We have a septic subcommittee that was developed under the Elk River Chain of Lakes Watershed Plan Implementation Team. And so the Elk River Chain of Lakes Watershed Implementation Team is basically a partnership between stakeholders, including county, township governments, local watershed organizations, lake associations, various other friends group. And as you can see by the subcommittee, it's comprised of a number of partners, again, from lake associations to local government, the health department, and watershed groups. Next slide. One of our first projects was the septic question. And so this was a partnership between the health department of Northwest Michigan and the Watershed Council. And the goal was basically to examine septic system policies and potential ways to solve them. So we have these final reports that were developed for decision makers, which includes specific policy options for the local units of government to consider. And a report was developed for each county within our service area and was provided then to all of the local governments. Next slide. And so here are the policy options that were included in the report, although we've also added options to the list. Short-term rentals were not a huge thing, nor were many entities considering sewer systems at the time that the report was completed. So, we've added those options in. So just really quickly to go over those policy options, maintaining status quo means kind of do nothing. That option requires no change in current oversight or policy processes. Education and outreach could be done, obviously, for little cost. But under this scenario, there might be some improvement that may occur after system failures are brought to the attention of the health department and are replaced. And as older homes and cottages, are torn down and replaced with newer homes, but the pace is basically not acceptable because essentially the systems are going uninspected, unmaintained, and ultimately fail, resulting in public health and environmental problems. A mandatory pumping ordinance is basically designed to prevent septic system failures by making sure everyone pumps out their tank within a specific time frame and shows proof of doing so. Some ordinances require an inspection to go along with that. Others simply just require the actual pumping within a specified time period. So this option has the potential to be arbitrary, if not scheduled correctly, according to the actual use of the property. Again, with second homeowners, some may not need to pump as frequently as others. And pumping too often is often not best for the operation of the system. Another option that is available is mandatory inspection requirement, in which inspections are regularly conducted and overseen by the health department or a third-party inspector within a specified time period. So the homeowner is required then to do whatever is appropriate for the system based upon that inspection. So if the inspection says, you know, pumping is required or maintenance is required, then they have to do so. Repairs are normally required within 60 days, but then additional time can be permitted with an agreed upon plan to help the homeowner. And the cost of this program is usually offset by homeowners paying a fee for the inspection. Time of transfer programs are those that require that a septic system is inspected at the time a lot is sold. So it informs the buyer of the state of the system and requirements for proper maintenance moving forward. If a system is found to be leaking or improperly operating or near the end of its effective life, a plan for remediation is normally required, and a follow-up inspection is done to ensure compliance. Inspections are usually conducted again by the health department, but contractors, third-party contractors can be designated. The only problem with this type of program is it may miss those properties that stay in the family for a long time. So if a property is given to children or grandchildren, which happens quite a lot up north, there's never that, the property is never sold. And we have seen some homes with extremely old and or failing septic systems because of that. I mentioned short-term rentals that are, short-term rentals are generally right on the waterfront. And targeting these is actually a really good strategic first step to protect our water resources. The Health Department of Northwest Michigan has identified short-term rental properties as a priority for protecting water quality and public health. Short-term rental regulations can protect against septic system failure by one, either limiting the number of guests based upon the septic tank size and number of bedrooms, or requiring the homeowner to have a current inspection on the septic system. And then also, in addition to septic systems, there's also sewer systems. And there's a lot of communities that have implemented or expanded their central sewer systems. Those are often established through the implementation of a special assessment district, which is an extremely time-intensive process with very strict procedural requirements. Key considerations for exploring sewer systems is, can septic systems in the area meet the sanitary code requirements? How will the project be funded, and how will the infrastructure be maintained? We currently have a backlog of $188 billion in wastewater infrastructure that has not been maintained over the years in the Great Lakes region alone. So how will it be maintained? How will the wastewater be treated and discharged? And then one of the big concerns, especially around our water bodies, is will it lead to increased development in the area? And is the community ready to manage that development? So, next slide. So when we provide those options to local units of government, we do have examples of success stories in Michigan. Kalkaska and Manistee counties has had a septic ordinance since 2009, Milton Township since 2012, and the village of Elk Rapids since 2018. They all acted to protect, obviously, drinking water, surface water, and to maintain the health and welfare of their citizens. So all of these programs are the time of transfer or point of sale ordinance. So it's requires the inspection and evaluation when there is a sale or transfer of the property. In Milton Township in 2020, I haven't gotten the updated numbers. There were 46 evaluations that were performed. And out of that, 21 of those, or almost 50%, the septic system was found to be undersized for the home. In addition, 18% were on water bodies, and of the 18, 5 were improperly isolated from the groundwater, with 4 being the minimum required separation distance. And again, 15 of those were found to have no records of permitting or installation, which means essentially we can assume that they are older than 50 years old, because that is when the sanitary code was put in place. Kalkaska and Manistee counties, during their first year alone, they did 314 inspections. In 2020, it has increased to 635. Most of theirs, actually, they have very few failed systems and serious violations. So they believe that the program is working fantastic, that homeowners get any potential problems solved prior to putting the house on the market. Next slide. So again, we've been taking this information and going to the various local governments, presenting them with all of the options. We don't tell them which option they need to have, which option they should have. We just present them with all the options and let them decide what is best for them. We can also provide them with model ordinance language and supporting information, such as the success stories. We also have a publication on what homeowners and buyers think of, a time of transfer ordinance. This information came out of Milton Township, where they actually went ahead and surveyed individuals that were underneath the time of transfer ordinance, and overwhelmingly positive results. Next slide. And then we've also been working on statewide policy, and for years we've been trying to get a statewide code passed. We've failed for various reasons, but we actually are very positive that this might be our year. There are septic bills that are going to be introduced very soon. Sponsors are Representative Skaggs from the Grand Rapids area and Representative Cavett from Sheboygan. Once those bills are introduced, they're going to convene a work group to sit down and discuss what is included in the bill, what needs to be changed, amended, etc. The Watershed Council has a number of concerns with any legislation that's introduced for septics. One, that there's no preemption of local governments. So local governments are able to provide more protection and they're, if they wish, so they're not prohibited from that. There must be adequate funding for implementation. There should also be funding for low-income homeowners to address any failures of septic systems. And then definitions are a key. Certainly what is the definition of a failure is one of the biggest topics we'll be discussing. The state of Michigan did allocate $35 million to assist with failing septic systems. The Watershed Council, has provided suggestions on how to implement that program along the way. Last I heard, Michigan Saves is going to put in a request for proposal to the state to administer the program. It'll be low interest loans to help people obtain funding for failing systems. Next slide. And I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge all of our funders and our partners, not only on our policy work, but also on our monitoring efforts with septics. And so the District Health Department, number 10, the Health Department of Northwest Michigan, the Lake Charlevoix Association, the Charlevoix County Community Foundation, Petoskey Harbor Springs Area Community Foundation, and the Dole Family Foundation. All of our work would not be possible without all of these entities providing support and funding to us. Next slide. Oh, questions?
Jump in there, and we have a lot of questions. So with Lauren and Jennifer, we'll do our best to answer those. I have a feeling we will not make it through all of those by 1 o'clock. So if some of you have to jump off, we'll try to follow up with some of those questions directly. I do want to make a quick shout out to Carolyn Keeson. I see that she's on the call, and she was actively involved in spearheading some of this research when she was with Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. And so she has been a great resource to us. Oh, first question, Lauren, what process was used to collect groundwater?
I would have to review the report on the actual monitoring because I wasn't out there doing it. So I know what I can say is that what we analyzed our surface water samples for, we also analyzed our groundwater for, so that we were able to kind of compare the two to see if what we were collecting in surface water was indicative of what was happening in the groundwater as well. Specific methods at this time I cannot speak to, but when our report is available, we can share that we'll have the actual methods we used.
So we'll get back to you directly on that question in the near future. The next question, is the survey available?
The survey itself is closed, if that's what the question is. In terms of the results, those will be included in that final report as well.
If a lake association would want a similar survey, what would be the cost?
That is going to be hard for us to answer because for our pilot project, it was it was a grant-funded project through Lake Charlevoix Association, and we also got our nutrient samples run for free from Central Michigan University. And I would not expect that we could get that for free for every lake that wants this. So at this time, I cannot speak to what that would be.
It's all in development. Did they get E. coli measurements immediately upon sampling, or have to wait until samples came back from the lab?
So in order to know what the E. coli results were, we had to wait for the results from the lab.
What time of the year was the survey administered? And it would be interesting to compare summer, winter, fall, and spring.
I believe the survey was administered in August. And I think it probably closed after a certain amount of time, but.
What questions did the health department answer for you? What was their knowledge data? That's a big question.
That is a big question, and unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that.
How much E. coli would be found in the soil not affected by residences, naturally occurring E. coli?
Again, unfortunately, I can't answer that one.
That would be a much more extensive research project. What kind of bias do you anticipate in those who did and did not respond to the survey?
That's a good question. I don't know if Jennifer, you would have an idea on that.
I think some of these questions will be important to keep as we move forward and look at those as being part of our work.
I agree. I think these are all great feedback to include for a future presentation for sure.
Well, you're helping us shape the future of the study. Are association members a representative sample?
Are the Lake Association members a representative? I don't know that our survey asked or had anyone identify themselves as whether or not they were a member of a Lake Association, so I can't answer that.
At this point, it does not seem possible to assess the impacts of septics on Lake Charlevoix. True?
True. Yep. We have not assessed this data, and we also had few sample points, and we were hoping to get to a lot more, but due to time constraints, we were only able to make it to a few.
Okay. Good work. Part of the benefit of doing this research is education. The more people become educated about septics, the better. Thank you. That's definitely been part of our agenda, both in a very well-rounded approach to the issue. Are you considering a random-based survey in order to report results regarding the whole lake rather than a targeted area?
That could be definitely a different approach that we take to future monitoring, but we really had to focus in on what areas we were, able to target. And that survey was both twofold, not only to be able to get information from residents, but also to try to get their permission to access to get that groundwater sampling as well. So that's kind of why we focused just on those homeowners.
Okay. There's a question regarding the mailing address database, if that all property owners or only residents, for instance, does it include renters?
So we got the addresses from the county's parcel data. So whatever address was tied to that is how they got mailed out, I believe.
There's a question regarding their spring association meeting and if they would be able to get the septic pamphlets to distribute to their members quickly.
Yes, we just need your contact information.
So if you could follow up with that information,
Yes.
and even if you just send it to info@watershedcouncil.org, we can get that information to you. So you'll need to give us an address and quantity. Did you look into where all this pumping material is disposed of and if it were not contaminating upstream?
So I think that was something that was looked at as part of the septic question report. I'm not sure if Jennifer has an answer for that one.
Okay, again, that's one that we will add to the list here. Are there any, are there any programs that might provide funding or cost share for pumping or repair of our systems?
Well, like I said, there is the state program that is going to provide 35 million, and also some of the septic legislation that should be coming out soon will provide funding for repair of systems as well.
That would be geared more to low income, is that correct?
No, that should be geared towards just a system that's failing and needs work.
Right. Thank you. Okay, this is a long one. How do we work together to get legislative action on improving septic systems in Michigan? 99+ million is available from EPA. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced close to $1 million to Michigan from President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law through this year's Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Jennifer, do you want to answer that one?
So the Clean Water State Revolving Fund goes to wastewater infrastructure that is more of your traditional wastewater infrastructure, your sewers, your wastewater treatment plants, not necessarily septic systems, unfortunately. But again, we are working on a package with Representative Skaggs and Cabot that hopefully will be coming out. Should be introduced. We're waiting any day now for it to be introduced. And when it is, you know, at that point in time, we need everyone to contact the elected officials to get this passed.
And I think it's always important to contact your state legislature and let them know that this is a concern of yours. If you're not doing that, you know, because they listen to their constituents more than anybody else, it's very important to have that relationship and make sure that your concerns are directly shared with them. We're rounding up the questions here. Based on the septic failure rate in areas with existing ordinances, should lake associations be focused on ordinance work as opposed to monitoring? What are some of the barriers or limitations to having more ordinances?
Having more ordinances, some of the barriers and limitations is it's an ordinance and people don't like rules and regulations a lot. And you know, there's a lot of pushback by various entities to having ordinances. But that being said, you know, those that have them are finding significant issues and significant problems with the septic systems in their area. And so I think it's completely worthwhile to continue to develop the septic system ordinances locally, especially in lieu of the fact that the state currently has nothing on the books.
And would you say that both reinforce each other? You really, you know, having both approaches, I mean, you really want to have both approaches in place so that, you know, the monitoring reinforces the importance of the ordinances and the ordinances reinforce the monitoring process. So, you know, together you have a stronger program or approach. So how much did your pilot on Lake Charlevoix cost?
So I believe the amount of that work was around 20,000, but I wouldn't expect that amount to be comparable to if we were to do a repeat survey on another lake, because a lot of it depends on what area you're sampling, how many samples you have to collect, and there's just a lot of factors that we couldn't say, you know, would get you anywhere close to, you know, what it might be for your lake.
In addition, the lab work was done for free for us by Central Michigan. So, you know, that was another big aspect too. But in the future, we should be able to generate a cost model. So next question, it's my understanding that mortgage companies require septic inspections before providing a mortgage. Do you know if this is true in our northern Michigan communities?
I know I did not have to have a septic inspection when I got my mortgage. So I know, you know, when you have an inspector come in when you buy the house, you can request that you get a septic and inspection done as part of that. You can make it a contingency on buying the house. But many people don't think about it, don't ask for it.
Oh, another great question. Does the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council have a septic system fact sheet that we can use when communicating with our state legislators?
We don't yet, but that's a fantastic idea. And once I see the final language that's the bills that are introduced and what we specifically want modified, I will get that done and get that out. Thank you.
Heard it right here during this webinar. That's a commitment. Okay, have the lake waters in Milton, Kalkaska, and Manistee been tested for E. coli, nitrates in pharmaceuticals?
So I can't answer to what maybe the health department or other organizations might do, but the Watershed Council monitors for nutrients, and then our other typical parameters like temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen and conductivity is part of our routine monitoring. So at this time, we don't do any extra monitoring with E. coli or pharmaceuticals. However, I know in the future, we would like to be able to expand our what we can offer with our monitoring.
Okay. Just a follow up on will we be able to answer the health department info sometime? So we'll follow up on that. This is an anonymous question, so it will be hard to follow up with you directly on that, unless you want to connect with us afterwards. The Biden-Harris administration announced more than $99 million for clean water infrastructure upgrades through the bipartisan infrastructure law in Michigan, and that they're just providing a link. So Kala, our tech person who is working behind the scenes, if you could share that in the chat, Kala, that would be great. Okay, we're real close to time. I'm going to try to squeeze these in. Isn't it true that both old and new septics send nutrient-rich effluent into your groundwater, feed in our lakes and drinking wells, and that septic pump outs, regardless how frequent, do not remove any of the liquid waste entering our groundwater? And isn't it, when available, a centralized sewer system is the only system to remove this harmful effluent?
I'm not sure that I can speak, specifically to the sewer part of that question. However, yeah, septic systems are not, going to treat, or, we wouldn't be expecting to find zero nutrients in our groundwater samples. So, and I don't know what the level is. I can't speak to, what nutrient levels we would be looking for exactly at this time.
And where does one rent a soil meter?
Another great question that I can't answer for you, but if you do want to know, feel free to reach out to us and we can get you connected with whoever it was that we worked with.
So what we will do is review these questions and follow up with a sheet that we will attach. It will not be tomorrow, but we will get this recording on our website in YouTube tube immediately, but YouTube page. But we will look at these questions, and so keep checking our website and our Facebook page to see a follow-up on making sure we can nail down some of these questions. And please know that your participation in questions have helped really contribute to our work here as we were pioneering this effort. It is one of those things that people have been concerned about, but at this stage, we are really, kind of at the forefront of trying to get a better handle on this. Jennifer and Lauren, is there anything else you want to add to final comments before I wrap up here?
The only thing I want to add is just to encourage people, if they're interested in hearing what the final results were, to tune into our Lake Association Summit this September, and you'll be able to find details on our website for that.
And pay attention for a septic bill coming out soon, and I encourage you all to contact your elected officials so we can finally get a statewide septic code.
And I would encourage you to visit our website, watershedcouncil.org, and search for the septic information, because there is a lot of information there, and we always have information in our office that's available too. So for those who want to share, brochures and fact sheets and things like that, contact us directly and we can help facilitate that. So I just want to thank everyone who participated today and throughout our Icebreaker series. We really appreciate it. We will next year, stay tuned. We will have another series, I'm sure, that will be dynamic. If you are not a member yet and you appreciate the work that we're doing here at the Watershed, I would really encourage you to do so. Our memberships are critical to our success. More than half of our funding is dependent on having memberships. So that's a substantial amount. We're looking at more than $500,000 there that enable us to do this water quality monitoring, policy and research work. Lastly, thank you, Lauren and Jennifer, for preparing for this presentation today and for the good work that you do every day. And there will be an evaluation following the presentation. And so we encourage you to do that so you can help formulate next year's Icebreaker series. And then I also wanted to mention, you saw very quickly a slide about podcast. A new podcast is going up tomorrow. It will involve an interview with Carolyn Keeson that we did before she went on to work for the state. And so it is specifically about the research project on this septic project with the Lake Charlevoix Association. So please look for that. It'll be posted on, again, our Facebook page as well as our website. That's all for now. And until next year, or if we see you out in the field, have a great summer and stay tuned.